In most true crime stories, the villain wants to be seen. They want attention, fear, and recognition. They want their name to be remembered, written in headlines, discussed in documentaries, and shared across the internet. But this story is different. This is the story of a man who wanted none of that. He didn't want fame, didn't want headlines, and didn't want anyone to notice him at all. He wanted to disappear inside normal life. His name was Israel Keyes. And for many years, he succeeded. To everyone around him, he looked completely ordinary. He worked in construction, owned a small business, paid his bills, and lived a quiet life. He had friends, relationships, and a daughter. He went to restaurants, grocery stores, and gas stations like anyone else. Neighbors described him as calm, polite, and responsible. Not very social, but not strange either. There were no obvious warning signs, no criminal record, no visible problems, nothing that would make someone feel uncomfortable around him. He didn't look dangerous, and that was the most dangerous part. Keyes believed that the perfect crime was the one that could never be connected to him. He avoided patterns, routines, and repeated behavior. He never stayed in one place for too long. He avoided doing the same thing twice. In his mind, attention was the enemy. The more attention something receives, the more visible it becomes. And visibility was exactly what he wanted to avoid. He traveled constantly across the United States, moving between different states and cities, sometimes for work, sometimes for personal reasons, often without clear explanations. He used planes, buses, and rental cars. He paid in cash and changed phones. He didn't build a stable routine. He didn't form deep social connections. His life looked like random movement without structure. To investigators later, everything looked disconnected. There was no geographic pattern, no clear connection between events. Everything seemed isolated, like separate stories that had nothing in common. And that was exactly what he wanted. He wanted his life to look like noise, like static, like something impossible to organize into a single picture. One of the most disturbing discoveries was that he had prepared everything in advance. Years earlier, he buried small containers in remote places across the country. Forests, rural areas, places where no one would normally go. Inside them were supplies, money, and tools. He could travel anywhere, dig one up, and leave again without attracting attention. He didn't need to bring anything with him. Everything was already waiting. Some of these containers were never found. Some may still exist today. This meant his actions did not require visible preparation. There was no online research history, no suspicious shopping, no obvious planning. Time and distance did all the work. He had separated his everyday life from his actions completely. For a long time, his system worked perfectly. There were no suspects, no evidence, no connections. He believed he had created a life where he could remain invisible forever. He wasn't chasing fame or excitement. He wasn't trying to shock society. He was chasing control. Control over distance, time, and information. He wanted to exist in the background of reality, to live a life where nothing pointed back to him, where even the idea of him as a threat did not exist in anyone's mind. But every system eventually breaks, not because it is weak, but because humans are never perfect. The mistake was small, almost insignificant. A simple trace that didn't fit his own rules. A moment where something became visible, and that was enough for someone to start asking questions. When investigators finally focused on him, he appeared calm and cooperative. He didn't panic. He didn't act aggressive. He spoke carefully and slowly, choosing his words. Even then, he tried to control what information existed and what remained hidden. He managed the narrative, deciding what parts of reality would be shared and what would disappear. Over time, it became clear that much of the truth would never be fully known, not because there was no evidence, but because everything had been designed to erase itself. Locations were separated, timelines were broken, patterns were avoided, everything existed in fragments. This case is frightening not because of how dramatic it is, but because of how normal it looks. There was no obvious monster, no warning signs, no cinematic image of evil, just an ordinary man who blended perfectly into society. And that is the most uncomfortable truth. Evil does not always look dangerous. It does not always stand out. Sometimes it goes to work, pays bills, smiles at people, and lives quietly next to everyone else. And most of the time, we never notice it at all.